Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money. A Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast with the spotlight on section hikers.
And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river.
Welcome to the podcast, everybody. You are listening to Jester Section Hiker, the premier podcast with the spotlight on section hikers. And I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart. I wanted to start off the show by giving a shout out and thank you to Leo McGonigal, who was a guest on episode number 21 of the podcast. If you'll remember on that episode, we talked about his awesome trail dog, Bella. Leo sent me something I can take with me each time I go out hiking, actually inspired by trail dog Bella. Thanks, Leo and Bella. I really appreciate it. The spotlight this week goes to section hiker and section biker Vince LoGreco. Part of my overall goal for this podcast is to feature section hikers from all 11 national scenic trails. And so far, including today's episode, I have had a variety of guests featuring 9 of the 11 national scenic trails. I am excited to share my talk with Vince today about his section hiking and biking of the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail. Before we hear from Vince, here's some information about the Potomac Heritage Trail as stated on the National Park Service website. The Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail has something for everyone. History, nature, recreation, wildlife, and conservation are all themes that find a home within the trail network. Pick your region, your experience, and enjoy the journey. From the mouth of the Potomac River at the Chesapeake Bay to the Allegheny Highlands of Pennsylvania, the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail lets us experience a rich variety of land and waterscapes. The National Scenic Trail incorporates 710 miles of existing and planned trails managed by federal, state, local, and nonprofit entities. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the podcast, and now on to my interview with section hiker Vince LoGreco. All right, you guys, welcome back to the podcast, and please welcome with me Vince LoGreco. Thanks for joining me today, Vince.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You know what, Vince? I should have asked you how to pronounce your last name before I introduced you. So did I say that correct?
Yes, you did. LoGreco, Italian for the Greek.
Okay. I love it. I love it. And you guys briefly heard in my introduction that Vince, yay, is the first section hiker and I'm going to call section biker that is out putting some miles on the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail. So thank you, Vince, for being my first victim on the podcast, talking about the Potomac Heritage Trail. But before we get into that, I've got a few questions to ask you, maybe a little bit about your background that intrigues me a little bit before we get into the hiking. So on your Instagram, you say that you are a cartoonist. And I just think that is the coolest thing. So tell us a little bit about being a cartoonist and kind of what you do with that, if it's a hobby or.
Yeah, mostly it's a hobby. I do a couple of different things. I do a single panel comic strip and as well as a 3 to 4 panel strip with with recurring characters as well. But it's mostly just humor that I find in the world around me, and I draw it down. Haven't been doing it as much as I'd like to these days, but due to work, when I used to have an office job, I was able to draw it on the clock. But
yeah, that work, it kind of gets in the way of a lot of things.
yeah, but now that I'm out on the road repairing copier machines, I can't exactly pull up my tablet when I have downtime and draw. So.
Well, I think that is so cool. I've never actually met a cartoonist, and I love good old-fashioned cartoons, so I'd love to see some of your work. Another thing that I saw as I stalked you on your Instagram, and he's smiling, by the way, so is you are a Cub Scout leader, and you just told me your Grand Poobah role with the Cub Scouts, and your daughter is also a Cub Scout, which I love. So talk to us about that.
Yes, she's one of the first three girls in my Cub Scout pack to join. We've already crossed one over to Scouts BSA, but we have a Weeblo right now, and my daughter is a Bear Scout. She started off as a Tiger the first year that they had it available for girls to join the Cub Scouts.
I just love that. And I love that picture of you. You have several pictures of you and her on Instagram with your uniforms on. And I just love that. And another thing I loved is during COVID, when the first initial things were happening with COVID last spring, you guys had what you called a virtual camporee, where you literally turned your living room or your basement into like this camping village with a tent and all this stuff. So talk to us what that event was and why you guys put that on.
It was actually an event put on by our council, which is the organization in charge of our area. It's the Chester County Council. They decided to have a virtual camporee. So they had a bunch of different sessions on Zoom and whatnot for the Cub Scouts to attend, like a scavenger hunt. And then they encouraged you to take a hike or camp in a tent, have a fire and all this stuff, and then hashtag it on Instagram for them. And then they ended the night with a traditional campfire ceremony like they do at Scout Camp, except they did it all through Zoom. And it was a big fun thing. It had skits and everything like that.
Oh, that is great. And how did your daughter like it?
She loved it. She's looking forward to the one that they're going to do in February here. So,
all right, now Vince, tell us the truth. How long did that tent stay up in the living room?
We took it down the next day.
I thought you were going to say at least till like July.
Well, when it wasn't raining, it was back out in the yard, but
even better place for it. So yeah. I just thought those three things were great. I've never met a cartoonist, a young lady being in the Cub Scouts. I think that's amazing, in the things that they learn and all that wonderful stuff at the virtual camporee. But let's get back to this the Boy Scouts. Was that a part of your background as a kid and all that stuff growing up? And is that what kind of led you to hiking?
Yes, we didn't do much hiking in the Scouts, but we did do a lot of camping, and we did kayaking, river rafting, things like that. In fact, we did some of it along some of the Potomac Heritage Trail. We kayaked the Youghiogheny River, which flows alongside the trail for a good bit in Ohiopyle. And we used to do a river cleanup there every year as one of our service projects. And then the river rafting company would let us go do a kayaking trip later in the year for free as a thank you. But we would camp at their campground and things like that. But I'm actually an Eagle Scout out of Troop 1305 in Cannonsburg, Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania is where I was in the Scouts.
And what was your Eagle Scout final project? I love seeing those Eagle Scout projects, by the way, the bridges, the benches, all kinds of stuff. I love seeing that stuff. So what was your final project?
Ours was rehabilitating a lot of structures and tables in a park, in the picnic grounds of our town park. A lot of the tables were covered with graffiti and had staples and chewing gum and things like that all over them. And so we rehabilitated the tables. We sanded all the graffiti off, put a fresh coat of stain on them, pulled all the tacks and staples and whatnot off of it. And
unbelievable what people do, but hey.
And we put a fresh coat of stain on the pavilion. We cleaned out all the bugs out of the light fixtures, and we finished the project a little early, and I still needed hours, so we added on redoing all the benches along the swimming pool too.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Well, listen, is that what led you? Because I know before we get into this Potomac Heritage Trail, you've also done some section hiking on the Appalachian Trail. So is that what kind of progressed you forward to do some section hiking on the AT?
Pretty much, yeah. It kind of put ingrained in me a love of camping, as well as that's what all our family vacations always were growing up too. And it was the love of camping that led me to wander off into the woods when I was in college. And plus, the orientation program at my college was a backpacking trip into the Monongahela National Forest. And so we would...
Oh, I'm glad you can pronounce that, because I don't think I've ever been able to. So I've seen that sign and I'm like, okay, whatever. I can't say it. All right. So say that again, Vince. So we all know now.
It's the Monongahela National Forest.
There you go.
But so my college was located right on the edge of the National Forest. And so on weekends, I would go out camping. When it wasn't snowing, I would go out into the woods and camp out there, just find random spots in the forest to camp. Then my senior year, I volunteered as a leader for that orientation trip, and we did a 3-day hike out there, and that was so much fun, leading a group of people and being on a 3-day hike. And that's where I learned about backpacking stoves and things like that. And because before that, I was just cowboy camping.
You might be the only one in West Virginia cowboy camping, okay?
But an interest in the Appalachian Trail kind of just started inching into me, especially after one of my bike trips on the C&O Canal. I saw those white blazes and on that stretch between Harper's Ferry and Brunswick.
And those white blazes, I don't know what it is, but they do something to you, don't they? I don't know. Yeah. I think they're every one of them. When I see one, I'm like, yes, white blazes.
I spent that whole winter researching the Appalachian Trail and wishing that I didn't have a job so I could go and do it.
So listen, what sections have you done on the AT? Some in Maryland, some in Pennsylvania?
I've hiked from Harper's Ferry National Park. I started kind of right at the Shenandoah River Bridge and hiked to PA Route 16 at Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania, near Waynesboro. And then I went back just this summer and continued kind of where we left off, except I started at Penmar Park because the parking was easier there. And we hiked to Pine Grove Furnace. So
nice. And that's a nice rocky hike, huh?
Oh, yeah. That first section in PA with but the in Maryland was a lot more rockier than I expected it to be.
I know. I don't know. There's a myth out there about Maryland. Oh, it's all flat. You could do the 4-state challenge and it's all dirt path, no roots, no rocks. And I'm like, no, that's kind of not the way it is. But hey.
Yeah, it took me a couple attempts to do the Maryland section because we were exhausted by the time we got to the Ed Garvey shelter. And
that was a wrap.
Yeah. And then a thunderstorm rolled in and we got a late start the next day. And a friend of ours shuttled us to the Wolfsville Road trailhead, and I had to come back a couple years later and finish the section between Gathland State Park and Wolfsville Road.
And that is a beautiful section. So I'm glad you were able to get back and do that.
Yeah, I was happy to do that section.
So you do something really unique and interesting, Vince, I think. So you told me you have a hiking year, and then the next year is a biking year because you're into section hiking, and I call it section biking. I don't know if there's a word for it. So tell us a little bit about why that is. Why hiking one year? Why biking the next year? And do you like one more than the other?
I like them about equal because basically the bike gets me a little further than hiking would, but then I like the slow pace of the hiking. So that's why I kind of divide up the time between them. I do 2 years of hiking, and then I do a year of biking, because the bike trips have to be a week long because of the longer distance, and because I try to do the entire trail at a time for the Scenic Canal and Great Allegheny Passage between Pittsburgh and DC. Because pretty much in the middle of all that, there isn't much places to get off. So,
which leads us into, okay, Vince and I have to tell you guys a story of how all this started. So it was probably 3 or 4 months ago now. I put out, I think I said on the podcast, I'm trying to have section hikers on eventually for all 11 National Scenic Trails. And then I put something out on my Instagram. I think I needed the Natchez Trace, Potomac Heritage Trail, the New England Trail, and the Arizona Trail at the time. And Vince, you sent me a I don't know what to call the DM. It was like, I think I've done this. I'll have to, if you want somebody to talk about it, I think I've done it. So tell us your side of the story.
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast. I'm about 3 months behind on all my podcasts now because of COVID, because I listen to it while I'm in the car driving for work.
Vince, it's time to catch up, okay?
I know. I've been trying to catch up. It seems as soon as I feel like I'm catching up, then I have a day off. And but so I was listening to the episode where you mentioned that at the end of the episode, and I thought, where have I heard Potomac Heritage Trail before? And so I Googled it and said, oh, I know that trail. I've been on that trail. I've hiked the Laurel Highlands Trail, and I've ridden my bike from the Ohio Pile to Washington, D.C. The only parts I haven't really done of it are those little spider web parts to the east of D.C. and the Virginia side of the trail. So,
and from what I can, okay, so Vince, sent me a little note, and he and I had a conversation, and then I went to work on researching and investigating about this trail. And this National Scenic Trail is very unique. And I hope that Vince and I explain this to you guys, how this works, because I have a feeling that a lot of you on the East Coast have probably been on the Potomac Heritage Trail and have collected miles on this trail and may not know it. So you're going to have to help me out, Vince. From what I'm learning, the total mileage of the Potomac Heritage Trail is 710 miles. And you've completed about half of that, or a little more than half of that.
Yeah, because I've ridden almost the entire length of the Potomac River itself. And I've done the Laurel Highlands Trail, like I said, which is 70 miles, and the 73 miles from the end of that by bike to Cumberland, Maryland. And I've done the whole 184 and a half miles of the Scenic Canal towpath.
So in the show notes, everybody, I have a link to a mapping system of the Potomac Heritage Trail, because as soon as I pull up this mapping system, it makes sense to me because I can see the whole picture, and you guys may want to go to the website and do that as well. So let's try to break this down. So this trail is not its own trail. It's a network of trails that encompass the Potomac Heritage National Scenic Trail. And interestingly enough, it's managed by the National Park Service, because a lot of the information I found out was from the National Park Service. And, they source out the various trail organizations or clubs that encompass this network of trails. And from what I'm gathering, Vince, you can tell me if I'm wrong, or maybe we've learned this together. It's kind of broken down into 4 different areas of trails. The Laurel Highlands, and a lot of you have probably heard of the Laurel Highlands Trail, which is 70 miles. And Vince, you've done all of that, correct?
Yeah, my brother and sister and I thru hiked it. Let me look at my notes here, in 2015.
So that trail, where is the Laurel Highlands Trail? Is that in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it's completely in Pennsylvania. It's in western Pennsylvania on the Pittsburgh end of the state. It goes from Seward, Pennsylvania, near Johnstown, all the way to... Now,
does it run east to west or north to south?
North to south.
Okay.
Which actually, I guess it's technically south to north because the miles count up. towards this milepost 70 is up in Seward, and milepost 0 is down in Ohio Pile.
Okay, so that makes sense. So south to north, so 0 to 70. So give us some of the highlights of the Laurel Highlands Trail.
Well, it's a pretty neat trail. If you've ever driven on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, you actually go underneath of a bridge where it crosses over. And it'll actually say Laurel Highlands Hiking Trail up on the side of the bridge. That's how I first learned of that trail.
Vince, you got a pattern here. That is hilarious. Who knows? I've probably been by it and have no idea.
Probably, because for years it just had like a chain link fenced little bridge going across it with no sign at all, and they replaced it like a few years before I did the hike.
So that must have been a hiking year, right? Because that was all on foot. And then it breaks down in this what they call the Great Allegheny Passage. And within the Passage network of trails, all right, everybody, if you have the map up, you'll know what I'm talking about at this point. So there's the Great Allegheny Passage, which is a rail trail, the Eastern Continental Divide Loop, which I'm assuming is a biking trail, and then the C&O towpath, which everybody knows as the C&O or the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal towpath. And then there's something within this called the Civil War Defenses of Washington Trail. And I'm like, where did that come from? So of this Great Allegheny Passage of what they're calling, talk to us about, because I know have you done all of the C&O towpath?
Yes, I've ridden all of the C&O towpath. One of these years I'd like to ride the whole thing all in one go. Something always happens where I can't get the whole C&O done in one trip, but one year it was a broken spoke on my rear wheel.
Oh no.
Another year, it was the first 3 days of the trip was all rain, and it slowed down our pace from our usual 8 to 10 miles per hour to almost a walking speed. So,
oh, wow. On the bike, right? A full packed bike.
Yeah, and a couple of times my bike slid in the mud and almost went in the canal. So,
oh, no. I don't know why I'm laughing, but Vince, you're laughing too. So
yeah, it's always, you can always laugh at it after the fact.
Exactly. Hindsight's always 20/20.
Yeah, and there was even a part of the trail which the Potomac River was actually over the trail during that trip. It was actually at a flood stage because of all the rain.
Oh, wow. So talk to us a little bit about when you're bike packing. I mean, I know you have all your gear to spend the night out. How is it with finding places to tent and water and things like that?
The Great Allegheny Passage is harder than the C&O because it travels through a lot of private land. So you have to rely on there's campsites on the Pittsburgh end of the trail, but south of Ohio Pile, you have to rely on private campgrounds to camp along the way. But once you're on the C&O Canal towpath, every 5 or so miles is a hiker-biker campsite.
Oh, wow. That is great.
Yeah, and they have an iodized pump. They have a porta potty and a fire ring and picnic table at each one. So,
well, let's not tell anybody about that. We don't want any of that stuff to be overcrowded. We want to keep that little secret all to ourselves.
I heard that this year, due to COVID, they had all the porta johns zip tied closed, and the pump handles were all off the pumps.
Well, I mean, that doesn't surprise me because, I mean, you got to do what you got to do with COVID. So that doesn't surprise me. Now, do you know anything about the Civil War defenses of Washington Trail?
No, I learned about it at about the same time as you.
Vince, we're doing pretty good here. Well, this trail, and as people look at the map, you'll see what we're talking about. We're laughing about it and everything, but it's confusing until you look at the map. So then there's this Southern Maryland bicycling route. Have you been on that portion of the Potomac Heritage Trail?
I may have walked on some of it when vacationing in Eastern Maryland, but I've never actually biked on any of it.
So it's waiting for you.
Oh, yeah.
And then I know earlier there's the Northern Virginia portion, and you were looking forward to getting out on that.
Yeah, I'm going to try to do a part of that from probably about the Chain Bridge into D.C. Because I always park my car at Great Falls if I'm going to be starting or ending in the DC end, and that way I can just take it's only 14 miles out of DC, and it's a lot cheaper to park my car there than to any of the garages in DC for a week.
Oh,
So,
I bet that is crazy prices. I
yeah.
can't even imagine what those prices are. And that's a good tip too for people, that might be interested in that. I mean, the parking cannot be easy.
Yeah. And this way I can get a shuttle or take Amtrak to the other end of the trail in Pittsburgh and then just kind of ride back to my car. But something I thought of doing this time is just riding the Virginia section into DC. And then when I go back to Pittsburgh and come back, I'll maybe dump some of my gear in the car and then ride the rest of the way into DC on the C&O, and then come back the next day after maybe staying in the hostel in the city, and come back to my car the next day and drive home. But
that sounds like a really good plan.
Yeah.
Now, what's a hostel in DC like? It sounded like you've stayed there before.
Yeah, I've stayed there before. It's the Hosteling International. It's I don't even remember what street it's on in DC, but it's easy biking in DC. They have nice bike lanes, and you just have to watch out for buses that randomly cross over the.
Well, that
bike
would
lane.
be a problem.
But the hostel is it's a tall building. It's your typical hostel with multiple bunk beds in a room and lockers, and then shared bathrooms down the hall for everybody on that floor. But since it's in DC, it's a tall building and with multiple floors of rooms, and then they have a common room downstairs with the kitchen, and they have like a continental breakfast in there in the mornings.
Nice, very nice. So, okay, the last part, Ed, I think you called it a spider web or a spider network of trails. The DC area network of trails. There are, to me, it just looks like several routes that go through the DC area. Any interest in completing all of those?
I'm not sure if I will try to complete them, but they're there. So, and maybe once I have this goal of finally getting the whole C&O done in one go, that could be a future endeavor to try to catch the rest of the Potomac heritage trails. So.
And now that we've totally confused everybody, let's recap on this. So basically, the Potomac Heritage Trail is a network of trails that encompasses the Laurel Highlands area, the Great Allegheny Passage, Maryland, the Southern Maryland Bicycle Route, Northern Virginia, and then there's a DC network of trails. So basically, it's Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and DC. Those are all four of the areas that the trail goes through. Am I missing anything?
I think you got it there.
All right, perfect. Vince is shaking his head convincingly. Yes, you got it. So walk us through, just so we kind of get an idea, maybe what years you hit particular areas. I know you sent me, I'll call it a hiking resume, so to speak. Like in 2003, you did some of the Great Allegheny Passage. You did 73 miles by bike. So kind of walk us through exactly what you've done.
Well, 2003 was the year I graduated college. So I wanted to do something that summer. And I'd been eyeballing the Great Allegheny Passage for a while because of the camping along the Youghiogheny and river rafting. I knew about the trail from that. And so I looked into it, found out that it was supposed to go all the way from Pittsburgh to Cumberland. At that time, it wasn't technically finished. So I had to do like a bypass over Mount Savage at that time and coasted down Route 40 into Cumberland, which my brakes were smoking by the time I got to
I imagine.
But I was able to roll right out of my apartment because I lived in the Pittsburgh area at that time and hit the trail and then go all the way to Cumberland. Because other than that one section there at the end, the trail was mostly done and had been established for a while. And then I did the opposite direction in 2006. I did Cumberland to Pittsburgh. I went all the way into downtown Pittsburgh and had to do road detours on the Pittsburgh side because it wasn't done on the Pittsburgh side yet.
And just so everybody knows, this is all on your bike packing this, correct?
Yeah. I had fully loaded. At that time, it was like bikes from Toys R Us or Walmart and whatnot.
My goodness. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that first trip in 2003, my pedal actually fell off in Meyersdale.
Oh my Vince.
I saw a rattlesnake on the trail, and it started rattling at me because I thought it was just a pile of sticks that I hit with my bike, and suddenly the pile of sticks started rattling. And
no.
I pedaled harder than I ever pedaled before, and the pedal came off.
Vince. Yeah, and when you get done explaining what you've done, I feel there's more stories to come. I do want to, before I let you go, I want to talk about your gear hiking versus biking, but let's get back. I think 2009 you wrote on here, it's the Oops ride. What did that mean?
Well, I had intended to ride from Pittsburgh all the way to DC that year. In fact, I stayed at my sister and brother-in-law's place in Washington, D.C., and because they lived in Georgetown at that time, and I hired a shuttle that was going to come pick me up and take me to the Pittsburgh end, and I was going to ride all the way back to where my car was in the D.C. area. I had it parked at a metro station north of the city because there wasn't any room in the parking garage for my brother-in-law and sister-in-law's apartment. But I spent like half the morning waiting for the shuttle to arrive, and I eventually called them and said, what's your ETA? When are you coming? And they told me that the shuttle driver was driving down I-68, and a truck carrying rocks in front of him had a boulder suddenly fall out of the back of the truck and smash his hood, the hood of his car. And
he wasn't coming.
Yeah, he was. They didn't have any way of contacting me. So because they didn't bother to ask me my phone number when I set up the reservation. And so I then rode my bike back to the metro station, got up, then took the metro back into the suburbs and then decided, well, I'm going to drive to Meyersdale and I'm going to try to salvage some of this. I'll do a loop from Meyersdale to Hancock and then come back to Meyersdale again. I started riding from Meyersdale. I got maybe 2 or 3 miles in and got a flat tire, which I was prepared for that. I carry a pump and a patch kit. So I patched up the tire, pumped it back up with air, and continued riding. I went through Big Savage Tunnel, and after crossing the Eastern Continental Divide, and I suddenly heard that pop and hiss again, and did the same thing, fixed the tire, but I used my last patch at that time. And about a few minutes later, I came to the Mason-Dixon line. I actually pulled out my little camera and was recording. And as I was going across the Mason-Dixon line, the second I crossed into Maryland, I heard the pop and hiss again. And at that point, I just set my bike down on the Mason-Dixon line and set up camp there for the night because it was already sunset.
And called it a night. Yeah, forget it.
And
you'd already been through it that day, Vince.
and the next morning, surprisingly enough, the sheriff of Cumberland was up there, up on the mountain on an ATV going turkey hunting, and he had an air compressor in his ATV, and I put my spare tube into the bike then, and he filled that up, and I said, okay, I'm going to try to salvage this trip some more.
You know what, Vince? Even on the Potomac Heritage Trail, the trail provides. There you go.
And I should have stopped in Cumberland, but instead I kept going, and I went to the first hiker biker site onto the C&O, and I was still going to try to get to Hancock and come back. And so I spent the night at the hiker biker site. The next morning I come out to my bike and the tire is flat again.
Vince, it's time to get a new bike or a new tire or something.
Yeah, I rode it back into Cumberland and took it to a bike shop there, and the guy fixed up the tire and put a new rim strip into it, told me my seat was too low and got that adjusted for me too. And he said, this bike is going to eventually cause you another flat. How far were you going to go? And I said, Hancock. And he says, well, there's no bike shops between here and Hancock, so that might not be a good idea. And he gave me a lift up to Frostburg. I spent the night at the campground there, and then I rode back to Meyersdale where my car was the next day. And
I got to tell you, Vince, the trail took care of you. I got to tell you. I mean, that's a story.
Yeah, I'm with the sheriff and plus the bike shop owner gave me a ride I don't know if I should tell the story of our drive from Cumberland up to back up to Frostburg or not, but the bike shop owner has a little dog that sits in the middle.
Oh
the middle
no,
of
I
the
don't.
truck
If it's
seat.
bad, I don't want to hear
No,
it.
it's, it's not going to be that type of story.
If something happens to the dog, don't say it, Vince. Don't do it.
This guy likes to speed, and he just suddenly says to his dog, I can't remember the dog's name, but he just says to the dog, "All right, be on alert for the police." And the little dog suddenly looks forward and starts looking left and right.
Are you serious?
And then he gives a yip at one point, and suddenly the bike shop owner downshifts his truck, and we slow down back to 55. And sure enough, there's a speed trap up ahead.
I can't with this story, Vince. I don't. I can't. Your story might top the cake of all stories on the Jester Section Hiker podcast. I can't. Hey, but you know what? Dogs can be trained. That's all.
Oh yeah, but
dogs can do a lot.
But that's the Oops ride, though. And after that ride, I got a much better bike. I used some of my dividend from REI that year and bought a nice bike from their REI outlet. And
good decision, Vince. Good decision. So
I used that for many years before a couple years ago in 2019, I built my own bike. So
okay. So we got to talk about that. All right. So we're going to get through this. So 2010, you rode your bike. 2013, you rode your bike. 15, we've talked about this. You did the Laurel Highlands portion, the 70 miles on foot. 2016, you went from Washington, D.C. to Great Falls. So you have done a total of 327.5 miles on the Potomac Heritage Trail. So congratulations on that, Vince. Job
Thank
well
you.
done. And thank you for figuring out that you have been on this trail. So we can get it out there, because I bet a lot of people, they might bike the C&O or, have been on the Laurel Highlands. And I know there's two places where if you are hiking the Appalachian Trail, if you've been out on your section hikes, where you have possibly been on the Potomac Heritage Trail, that is in Harper's Ferry. And then where it crosses, is it the Tuscarora? Does it go near the Tuscarora Trail? I think it crosses. So. Yes.
Because it's
the C&O path crosses the Tuscarora Trail as well.
Yeah, I believe so.
I've learned that in all my map, all of my memorizing of the Potomac Heritage Trail mapping system. So,
and the AT is actually part of that, I guess, if you think about it, because it follows the C&O Canal Towpath out of Harper's Ferry before it starts to climb again up to Weaverton Cliffs.
Well, there you go. A lot of people have been on it and probably didn't pay much attention. And I know exactly where it turns off there. You kind of cross railroad tracks, I think, and go across a road and up to Weaverton Cliffs. So there you have it. So let's get into this, your hiking gear versus your biking gear. And you said something to me before we started recording, because I was asking you, what's the difference? Do you carry both sets of gear? So go into that a little bit for us.
Most of my gear is the same. I use the same sleep system. I have a hammock from Dutchware, and the quilts that go along with that, and the bug net, and the tarp. And then,
so are you a hammocker as well when you're hiking?
Yes.
Right.
I used to do tent, but then somehow accidentally stumbled into hammocks and got so much better night's sleep in that than I did on the ground. So
that's what I have heard. That's what everybody says. And I'm afraid to go and get in a hammock and have a good night's sleep, because I don't think I'll ever go back to a tent. So, but I am extremely interested. So that's interesting. Okay. Continue on.
So I have the same sleep system I use for hiking, same electronics that I bring for phone, except for the bike I have the GPS unit for the bike that tracks the ride. For hiking, I use my watch instead, but then let's see here.
I'm sure clothing is probably a little bit different. You got your bike clothes versus your hiking clothes.
All my hiking clothes are actually what I use as my camp clothes when I'm biking. So
there you go. And do you bring like any, I would imagine with biking, you might bring more stuff.
Yes. For my cook kit, I bring more for that. And I bring a little bit more food and more raw ingredients instead of my dehydrated stuff I bring for backpacking. So I actually bring a whisper light stove instead of using my alcohol stove or a little not jet boil, but the little MSR pocket rocket. That's what it's
pocket
called.
rocket, yeah.
So I bring the whole huge whisper light with the liquid fuel can and everything for that.
And what about like rain gear? Like, is the rain gear the same? I mean, if you're riding on your bike and it's pouring down the rain, I mean, you're probably going to put your rain gear on whether it's summer or not, right?
Yeah, I have the same. I have an outdoor research rain jacket with the pit zips and everything, and I wear it hiking or biking. So it's the same rain gear for that. And then my bike has 4 waterproof panniers on it, so
Right.
for carrying all my gear.
And I'm going to put a picture of your bike in the show notes because that thing is decked out. It looks nice, and you got a nice seat on it. And you built that, right?
Yeah, the blue one is the one I built, or the dark blue one is the one I built, because there was a brown one I had there intermittently from REI.
Yeah, get rid of that REI thing. Tell us about what made you want to build your own bike?
First of all, the REI bike, since it was a clearance model, it was never really the right size for me. So sometimes I would get pain in my shoulders from reaching too far for it, and I was getting some pain in my knees from it. And I realized it's probably because this thing's not the right size. And so I had myself measured and everything and ordered a frame from a bike shop in Missouri that shipped it out to me. And then I took most of the components from that REI bike and moved them over, upgrading some of them, like putting a little bit better gearing on and things like that. And new chains and new cables and stuff.
And I imagine in the biking world, just like the hiking world, you can go down a rabbit hole with gear real quick.
Oh, yeah.
Real quick. And talk to me, because I know a biking seat is vitally important.
Yes.
And I cannot remember the name. You have a leather seat on there, and I cannot remember the name of it.
Mine's a Brooks leather
saddle. Brooks leather seat. So yes, those are... You have to break those in, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But once they're
100 miles, and then the next thing you know, it's the most comfortable seat that you've ever ridden on. So,
yeah, I noticed that seat because my dad lives in Ohio, and there are rails to trails access points where you could ride your bike, no traffic. And the first time I saw one of those bike seats, I was like, "What is that, Dad?" And he was like, "Oh, this is the best thing you can buy." So that's when I was introduced to it. So when I saw that on your bike, I was like, all right, Vince knows what he's doing. So anyway, Vince, awesome. And this has been an awesome conversation. And I hope people have gotten a little taste of the Potomac Heritage Trail, and they've probably been out on it. And in all seriousness, I do recommend that everybody go to the National Park Service website. They have an awesome mapping system where you can see how all the trails interconnect. You can see they actually have the Appalachian Trail on the map, so you can kind of see where the Appalachian Trail is versus the Potomac Heritage Trail network of trails. So thank you, Vince. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And now I think we've come to an awesome point where Vince is going to sign off for us. And Vince, I don't know if you're going to read a journal entry statement or a quote, but whenever you are ready.
All right. Well, I'm going to read a letter that was an editorial or written in response to an editorial in the Washington Post by Justice William O. Douglas on January 19th, 1954. It was in response because the editorial was supporting the federal government's idea to pave over the C&O Canal towpath and turn it into what they were going to call the C&O or the Potomac Parkway, which was going to be a 2-lane highway from Washington, D.C. to Cumberland, Maryland, similar to like the Blue Ridge Parkway or or Skyline Drive. So this was his response to them. And it's actually what kind of started the C&O Canal being preserved as a National Historic Park. The discussion concerning the construction of a parkway along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal arouses many people. Fishermen, hunters, hikers, campers, ornithologists, and others who like to get acquainted with nature firsthand and on their own are opposed to making a highway out of this sanctuary. The stretch of 185 miles from Washington, D.C. to Cumberland, Maryland is one of the most fascinating and picturesque in the nation. The river and its islands are part of its charm. The cliffs and the streams and the draws, the beaches, the swamps are another part. The birds and game, the blaze of color in the spring and fall, the cattails in the swamp, the blush of buds in late winter, these are also some of the glory of this place. In the early 20s, Mr. Justus Brandius traveled the canal and river by canoe to Cumberland. It was for him exciting adventure and recreation. Hundreds of us still use this sanctuary for hiking and camping. It is a refuge, a place of retreat, a long stretch of quiet and peace at the capital's back door, a wilderness area where we can commune with God and with nature, a place not yet marred by the roar of wheels and the sound of horns. It is a place for boys and girls, men and women. One can hike 15 or 20 miles on a Sunday afternoon or sleep on high, dry ground in the quiet of a forest, or just go and sit with no sound except water lapping at one's feet. It is a sanctuary for everyone who loves woods, a sanctuary that would be utterly destroyed by a fine two-lane highway. I wish the man who wrote your editorial of January 3rd, 1954, approving the parkway, would take time off and come with me. We would go with packs on our backs and walk the 185 miles to Cumberland. I feel that if your editor did, he would return a new man and use the power of your great editorial page to help keep this sanctuary untouched. One who walked the canal its full length could plead the cause with the eloquence of a John Muir. He would get to know the muskrats, badgers, and fox. He would hear the roar of wind in the thickets. He would see strange islands and promontories through the fantasy of fog. He would discover the glory there is in the first flower of spring, the glory there is even in a blade of grass. The whistling of wings of ducks would make silence have new values for him. Certain it is that he could never acquire that understanding going 60 or even 25 miles per hour.
Wow. Vince, thank you very much for reading that. And I really, really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
All right. Thank you for having me.
So, all right, you guys, Vince and I, you guys thought you were done with us, but after Vince got done with his reading, we continued talking. And Vince has actually been out on a day hike on the New England National Scenic Trail. So, Vince, I might need to get you an administrative assistant so you can keep up with all this stuff. So, real quick, just talk to us about that.
Well, I was just this spring, I was back in March, I was in Connecticut, up in Windsor, Connecticut for training for work. And on the weekend, since COVID had happened, a lot of places were shutting down and I didn't want to travel into Hartford like I was planning to do. So I had brought my hiking boots with me and decided to go on a day hike and saw that there was mountains nearby and a trail. And
Vince, you're killing me.
Yeah. And so I picked a trailhead and started walking on what I thought was called the Metacomet Trail. And I did basically an out and back on it. I walked up and then walked back to my car, which I think I have photos of it on my Instagram.
Yeah, we need proof, Vince. We need proof.
And when I got back to my hotel room, I thought, well, what is this Metacomet Trail? Because it was nicely blazed. It was a really nice trail. And so I Googled it and found out it was part of a trail called the New England Trail. So.
All right. Well, I think we can add that to the list. And the reason I'm saying that is you just told me before I brought you back on that you want to continue kind of section hiking that National Scenic Trail as well.
Yeah, that's one of my bucket list things too, is to one day hike all of the New England Trail. Because I think it goes from, see if I can try to remember. I think it goes from
here we go, everybody.
Long Island Sound up to the Massachusetts border, I think, or a little bit north of the Massachusetts border.
And I think it's around 200. Now, I might be totally off, but I'll look this up before I give you guys my closing remarks. And this is going to be a good one. I feel like it's around 275 miles, but who knows? I might be way off on that. But all right. So, Vince, you've said it here. You're going to get out and start section hiking that trail as well. So, All right, everybody. Vince and I will try to, or I don't know. After we hang up here, I might find out more that Vince is doing. So thanks again, Vince. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
What a great interview and reading to close out the show from Vince. Thanks for reaching out to me, Vince, and sharing your journey on the Potomac Heritage Trail with all of us. If any of you, or if you all know anyone out section hiking the Arizona Trail or the Natchez Trace, please send me an email to jester@jestersectionhiker.com. The podcast has now had guests covering 9 of the 11 National Scenic Trails. That is really awesome. As always, all of the information, resources, and pictures from today's episode can be found in the show notes at hikingradionetwork.com. If you like what we do here at the network, please consider a donation to your favorite show and leave us a review. Each donation and review truly makes a difference in what we do. Until next week, thanks for listening, everybody, and happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way, if you ever get lost or if the trail leads you astray. The music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Looking for a fun way to win up to 25 times your money this basketball season? Test your skills on Prize Picks, the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projection for a wide variety of stats, and place your entry. It's as easy as that. If you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Easy gameplay, quick withdrawals, and injury insurance on your picks are what make Prize Picks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. Ready to test your skills? Join the Prize Picks community of more than 7 million players who have already signed up. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit up to $100. Just visit prizepicks.com/get100 and use code GET100. That's code GET100 at prizepicks.com/get100. for a first deposit matchup to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy.